Well, that's a very good question. We are not a very high-saving country. We never have been. We like to spend money. The Japanese, by contrast, have been high savers. And we are now importing capital from abroad, depending on the savings of others, because not only are we not very high private savers, but we are now public dissavers, and that brings us back to the budget deficit again. We're using most of our own savings to finance the government, which makes us much more dependent on the savings of the Japanese and others. We have got to stop importing as much capital from abroad, which is another way of saying we've got to correct our trade deficit. But if we do that, we have to release our own private savings for active duty. Stop using them to finance the government. We have to cut government spending and or raise taxes. I think we have to do both so that our own savings can be used to increase investment.
Yes. Again, in the time of economic expansion, the budget is not as difficult to handle. The deficit is not as difficult to cope with, since the government expends over half of the credit that's available around this country. But what happens if we do slip into a recession? Then what?
Well, then we will realize first how much we should have corrected the budget deficit before that happened. There certainly, almost everybody on this panel has been saying correct the deficit while you can, because it's much more possible to correct a deficit while the economy is growing. If we slide into a recession, and eventually we will, we haven't repealed the budget deficit, the business cycle by act of Congress, nor are we about to. If we slide into a recession, then the deficit will automatically get larger as tax revenues fall off when not as many people are working. And some of the expenditures of the government for unemployment compensation, for example, go up. That's not bad, but when it comes on top of an already very large deficit, it complicates the problem. It also means that if we're in a recession, the government has lost the tool of fiscal policy that it used to have. It can't add to the deficit in order to ease the recession problem. The deficit's already so large that everybody will just want to rein it in. So it gives away, the fact of having the deficit gives away one of the tools that the government used to have to counteract recession.
Ms. Rivlin, since you're a numbers person, this questioner asked 3 questions. One is that how much of the budget and the deficit is dealt with by what they refer to as smoke and mirrors or as accounting gimmicks. And what they refer to, obviously, is the fact that on some of the budget they transferred the payment of the military, for instance, from the end of the month, from the first of the month to the end of the month, and then claimed a savings to the budget. How much of that goes on, and do you think it's a serious problem, or is this just an exception?
No, I think it's a serious problem. We have always, at varying degrees, yielded to the temptation to do things that are cosmetic rather than painful to ease a budget deficit. That didn't start with this Congress. It goes back a long way. But 2 things have happened in the last several years. Part of the action to bring the deficit down has been very real. Congress has cut spending. It has held military spending level. We've had no increase in military spending for the last 2 years. That has helped bring the deficit down. And other spending has been cut in a real sense. If you take out defense and Social Security and the other entitlements and interest and look at what is sometimes called non-defense discretionary spending. That means the things that Congress can really control in the short run other than the defense budget. That spending has gone down as a % of our gross national product dramatically. It has gone down to a level that it was back in the 60s before the Great Society. So there has been real progress against the deficit. There's also been this other stuff. When you're trying to meet a target for a deficit, it's very easy to say, well, we could meet it by selling some assets and take those off. We'll get a little quick cash that way. The trouble is, those assets earn something for the federal government, and next year you can't sell them again, and you get a little less earnings. And then there's the even more phony stuff, like moving paydays around, which is a last resort and something that shouldn't be yielded to.
Yes.
Yes. Smoke and mirrors can be variously defined, as Alice well knows. And I think one instance of smoke and mirrors that seems to be in vogue right now not only concerns the sale of assets, but also some of the assumptions that you have to make in order to put a budget together. The CBO estimates, that's the Congressional Budget Office estimates, seem to be much more realistic than the estimates that we have gotten from the Office of Management and Budget. But there still is a problem as far as even the CBO estimates are concerned. For instance, looking at a 5-year projection, they assume, actually a 10-year projection, they assume that that there will be a steady growth in the economy without any recession whatsoever, which we hope is true. They also assume that there will be, that the revenues from the government into the government will grow at about a 59% rate, which is the total which they assume for the economic growth. And now that is a little smoke, and I'll give you a mirror now. The mirror is that the outlays for non-discretionary or discretionary federal spending will grow at only 32%. Now, in other words, discretionary spending only grows 32% in 10 years, and the outlays or the revenues grow 59%. I submit to you that those figures are suspect. Naturally, I hope they're true. I doubt that they will be, and if they aren't, then the budget situation 10 years from now could be even worse than it appears now that it might be.
This is the distinguished former minority leader of the House side, Congressman Rhodes of Arizona. Congressman Rhodes of Arizona is one of many public-minded citizens that have formed a committee for the responsible federal government. They have done more to put input into the budget process and try and get answers to some of these dilemmas. Thank you very much, Congressman Rhodes, for that.
May I correct you? I am former Congressman Rhodes. The present Congressman Rhodes is my eldest son.
Yes. No commercials, please. Anyway, we are very proud of your son, and he is doing a terrific job, and he's learned a lot from his father, obviously. He's one of the best constituent-serving people I've ever seen. If you talk to some of those people in Arizona, they'll make you a believer out of him. Alice Riverland, we're not going to let you off the hook. We have to ask you a lot of questions through this hour and a half, but in particular, we wanted your opinions on some of these asset sales. Should the government, for instance, be running a railroad, as they do with Amtrak? Should they be having oil reserves, as they do? And you've already voiced your opinion on the sales of those. The other follow-up question to the question that was initially put to you is, what about all these user fees? Is it smart, for instance, and can we afford to charge people that use the public parks and let that be a revenue base so that we can cut the deficit?
Well, let me correct a misapprehension. I don't think asset sales are always wrong. Selling Conrail was a good idea. The government shouldn't be running a railroad, but they aren't long-run solutions to the budget problem. User charges are another matter. It does seem to me, and to many economists, that when the government is producing a service that meets the needs of particular people who can afford to pay for it, then they should pay for it. It shouldn't be paid for out of general tax revenues. For example, when the Coast Guard expends a good deal of energy going out and rescuing yachtsmen in trouble off the coast, that's a good service and we ought to have it, but probably the yachtsmen ought to pay for it. And there are a lot of services which the government performs